Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our Lean Startup webcast. Today's topic is using lean and design thinking to increase impact in the social sector. I'm Felicia Chenko, production manager of Lean Startup Company. Lean Startup Week 2017 is 1.5 months away. If you're planning on joining us in San Francisco, grab your pass before October 15th to save on our fall sale. Visit leanstartup.co for more information. Our speakers today are Amy Ahern, Innovation Manager of Acumen, and Shalu Umapathy, Managing Director and Location Lead of IDEO.org. Moderating is Ann-Mei Chang, Executive Director of Lean Impact. You can catch these speakers during Lean Startup Week at the following sessions. Ann-Mei will be giving a keynote talk about amplifying social good using Lean Startup on the morning of November 2nd. That afternoon, Shalu will lead a panel discussion on innovation, impact, and design thinking for social good. On November 3rd in the afternoon, Amy will lead a panel discussion on applying lean data to rapidly assess social impact, and Ann-Mei will lead a mini workshop on lean impact, overcoming barriers to lean for social good. A few housekeeping notes. We'll be taking questions from the audience via the live chat. If you'd like to ask a question, please flag it by starting with a Q: before your question. We're raffling off a silver pass to Lean Startup Week. For a chance to win, simply add to the conversation with a question or comment during the broadcast. This will be a 45-minute program, and the recording will be available after this live webcast. Take it away, Ann-Mei.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our webcast on Lean Impact. My name is Ann-Mei Chang, and I'm working with Lean Startup Company to develop resources for the social sector, starting with my upcoming book called Lean Impact. I spent over 20 years working in the tech sector before making a pivot 6 years ago to focus on global development. Most recently, I was the Chief Innovation Officer at USAID. While we've seen how approaches from Lean Startup have helped both large and small companies across multiple different industries accelerate their ability to innovate, my sense is that the social sector has lagged behind. Yet, as we face increasingly complex and intractable social challenges around the world, we need better solutions more than ever. I believe that lean approaches can dramatically accelerate social impact and scale. But we also need to recognize that innovation in the social sector is more complicated and can require grappling with some unique barriers. I could think of no two better people to dig into both the challenges and opportunities than Amy and Shalu, who represent two organizations at the forefront of developing and applying modern lean approaches to achieve greater social good. Let's start off with Shalu. Shalu, can you start out by sharing a brief overview of your role and the work of IDEO.org?
Sure. So I'm Shalu. I'm Managing Director of our San Francisco studio at IDEO.org. And at IDEO.org, we use the approach called human-centered design, which is putting the end user, gaining deep empathy for them, and then designing products, services, and experiences for them. And when I think about kind of the audience that might be listening in today and kind of what HCD might mean for them, it's about really unique ways of teasing out the difference between what people say and do and what they think and feel. And so we use really interesting research methods like games and interactions with people to really surface what their inner goals and desires are. And then we use interesting prototypes to actually test solutions and put solutions in front of people and gauge whether they would actually shift their behaviors. And just to kind of get tangible about that, one of the really cool research methods we used in a reproductive health project that we did with Marie Stopes in Kenya, the question was, how might we get young girls access to contraceptives? And we used, we kind of set up a pop-up nail salon. And so we kind of invited girls to come in, get their nails painted. And then that was a moment for us to ask them questions about their personal lives and their boyfriends and what do they know about contraception? Where does it fit into their lives? And what do their parents think about it? And that was a really unique experience for us to really understand their context and gain empathy for them. So that's like a mini snippet.
Thank you so much, Shalu. Let me turn to Amy. Amy, could you also give us a brief overview of yourself and the work of Acumen?
Sure. So my name is Amy Ahern, and I am an innovation manager at Acumen. Specifically, I work on our Plus Acumen team, which designs and runs over 30 free online courses for social sector leaders, including one on lean startup principles for social impact and one of our most popular courses, the course for human-centered design with IDEO.org. And these courses come out of Acumen's work as an impact investing fund. And so our core work is that we raise philanthropic capital But rather than giving it away as grants, we invest it in social enterprises around the world that are tackling problems of poverty. So that could be anything from a sanitation company in the Kenyan slums to a maternal hospital chain in India. And so out of that work, we decided that as an impact investor, it was really important to be actually listening to our customers and figuring out what impact we were having on their lives. So to do so, our impact team developed a methodology just about 3 years ago now that's called Lean Data. And it really relies on using lean experimentation principles to access the customer voice at scale, even in places like rural Ethiopia or Bangladesh or the Philippines, where you might think it can be hard to get to those end users who are in more remote locations or village settings. But we use survey techniques ranging from SMS surveys to interactive voice response to phone banks to really elicit the customer perspective, and then use those insights to help our entrepreneurs who we invest in to directly update the design of their products and services. And so one concrete example there, one of the first companies we tried this with was an ambulance company in India called Zakitsa Healthcare. And they were running a fleet of over 1,000 ambulances, responding to up to 2.5 million calls a year, and yet really didn't have a concrete sense of who the users were that were actually accessing their ambulance services. So we rolled out these lean data surveys, and over a period of just a month, we talked to 1,000 of their customers. And what we ended up learning was that it was a lot of pregnant women who were using the ambulances to get to the hospital. And so having those customer insights directly allowed us to work with the company to update how their services were delivered and to optimize them for those mothers specifically. So that's just one example of lean data in the Acumen's context.
Thank you so much. So I'd love to ask both of you, why do you think it's important for organizations that are seeking to deliver social impact to use lean approaches such as human-centered design and lean data? What's the value to them?
That's a great question. I think when we think about lean in the social sector, the stakes are just that much higher because you are providing critical goods and services that are doing things like delivering healthcare, clean water, energy access, and education. So if you don't directly listen to your customers and have a way to rapidly get their perspectives and then use them to build, measure, and learn to update what you're offering, you know, the chance to offer someone education or clean water or energy is on the line. And so it's directly improving people's lives. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important.
Yeah, and just to build on that, I think bringing kind of dignity and choice and agency into people's lives it's an opportunity, right? I think many programs in the past addressing especially low-income populations have kind of said, this is the answer, do this, you know? But imagine if that user then had a choice to say, this is my suite of options. I have the agency to make that decision to improve my own life, and just giving respect to the people that we're trying to serve and their lives and tell them that they have choices. I think that it's an important thing that we can do as we're designing social solutions.
Absolutely. So it sounds like there's so much promise for lean in the social sector. Yet my experience is that it's not all that common still, unfortunately. So what are the barriers or challenges that make doing lean more complicated in the social sector? What have you guys encountered?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think one of the things that I've noticed is just people have trouble just taking the first step. So design research, it sounds so big and scary, and talking to users, that must mean that we have to hire a research firm that costs a lot of money. But actually, you could just step out of your office and leave your desk for a minute and go talk to somebody and just ask them a few questions about how was their experience with your product and what could you do better. And sometimes that means like maybe taking off a suit and putting on some regular clothes, but it really, it's surprising sometimes how much people want to share their experience and could give you really actionable solutions to improve your product or service. So I think for me, many times it's a mental block. I think one quick example is we worked with Airtel, which is a mobile network operator in Tanzania, And they had, they have like a team of extremely intelligent folks that are working at their headquarters. And then we had done a set of research insights and shared them back, and they were like, oh, this is so interesting. So we said, okay, come along with us. Let's go to the field together. And so they participated in it. And then by the end of the engagement, they had shifted their own culture so that once a month, their leadership team was going into the markets to do market visits and talk to people about their products that had launched most recently. So I think that cultural shift is definitely possible, but it's sometimes just taking that first step.
Yeah, and I would say similarly, we see kind of two different types of barriers that come up when people are trying to implement a lean data approach specifically. So the first is for social entrepreneurs, because usually these are kind of scrappy, very hardworking people who are just trying to get a business off the ground. And so they have a lot of competing priorities for their time. And they think, wow, measuring impact, like that would be a nice to have, but first let me try to just actually develop a sustainable business model. And so I think what we saw with a company specifically called New Story Charity, which invests in building communities in places like Haiti and El Salvador. They had just come out of Y Combinator, so the accelerator here in San Francisco. They were really trying to build 1,000 homes in 100 days. They were really trying to get things off the ground. They thought that measuring impact had to be through the form of like randomized control trials or setting up these very elaborate experiments that would take a long time to deliver results. But they ended up taking our lean data course, and through that, their impact manager, Emma Lawley, realized that actually you could just get started by developing a very simple 10-question survey, going out, talking to those people in Haiti, getting insights back, and using that to inform their impact approach. Similarly, when we work with international development organizations or NGOs, I think they're often beholden to this very top-down approach where funders or government agencies are giving them a very comprehensive kind of impact framework or a log frame where they have to like collect so much data. And so they feel like it's not really helping them actually make decisions. And so in that case, we really recommend, again, just paring down to like, what are those 10 essential questions and 10 essential insights you need from your customers, and always using it in the service of decision-making, not just reporting back to a funder who's sitting, millions of miles away.
Yeah, and if I can add in just from my experience, some of the barriers I hear a lot from people are funding in the social sector, especially for nonprofits, is often very restrictive, where you have to define your plan ahead of time in your proposal, and then you're expected to execute on that plan. And so it makes it very difficult to be flexible and learn along the way, because you really have deliverables that you have to deliver in order to satisfy your funder. I also hear a lot of folks, and I'm curious, Amy, if you have thoughts on this, talk about but the impact of what I'm doing, if I'm trying to impact graduation rates or the cycle of poverty, people won't, we won't know whether it worked for like 4 years or 10 years or something. So how do we even, how can we even do this? Like, social impact takes a long time. Do you have an answer for that, Amy, from a lean data perspective?
Yeah, I think we try to integrate a lean data perspective with a systems thinking approach. And so we've worked with the Omidyar Group, which is another great funder in this space, to use their systems thinking methodology, which asks you to look at like the entire social system you're trying to affect and really develop a near star, which is kind of your short-term goals, and then a North Star to kind of orient your entire approach. And so we think it's helpful once you've mapped your entire system and identified the leverage points you want to impact, then you use your lean data approach to actually get to your individual customers, think about how they are interacting with your intervention, and you kind of can measure the impact of the intervention directly on those people. But ultimately, it's in the service of trying to change that bigger system and ultimately reach your North Star or your guiding star.
That's great. That's a great answer. And for both of you, one of the questions that is coming in from the audience is like, so how do you balance this quick sort of fail fast approach of lean with the complexity of systems that we're trying to deal with? How do you think about that, making that balance work?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've alluded to it already, Amy, but thinking about what is the question that you're trying to answer, and what is the metric that you might want to see numbers around in the near term, right? So I think one example is like some of the ways that we do prototypes. Trying to think of it. So we did a clean water kind of business that we were testing out in Kenya. And so we were like, what is the right channel strategy for the social enterprise that we want to launch? Should it be door-to-door sales? Should it be a guy with a trolley who kind of delivers it to your doorstep? Should it be a kiosk that's in town? And so we basically ran the prototype for 2 weeks to try and see which was the delivery mechanism that was most successful. And so that was the question that we tried to answer. And then we basically, after 2 weeks of running those prototypes, were able to see, like, quantitatively which one was more successful in terms of attracting more customers, and what was the qualitative feedback that we heard from those people. So I think if you can narrow on what that question is, then you can very quickly get insights from some tests. So.
Mm-hmm. And Charlie, I have a follow-up question for you about how you were able to arrange such a productive partnership with Airtel.
Yeah, so I think anytime that there's a partnership, partnership at the end of the day is about people. And so we met with the CEO of Airtel in Tanzania through an introduction from the Gates Foundation. And one of the first things he said to us was, we want to be the most loved brand in Tanzania. And so for us, that was like, boom, we got you. Like, let's figure out what people need, and then let's design around those constraints. And so for very quickly, it was like there was a win-win opportunity for us to be working on an issue that was going to solve poverty-related challenges, and then for them to kind of think about their relationship with end users. So I think at the end of the day, it's about business and people, and we got both of those.
Right, and for folks who are in larger organizations, often trying to institute these lean approaches can be a huge challenge. You're pushing uphill against, culture and existing methodologies and bureaucracies and so forth. Do you have any strategies that you can offer to people who might be, a lone advocate for lean approaches, HCD, lean data, within a larger organization, and how they can start getting traction?
Yeah, so one story I love to tell is of Virginia Hamilton, who works within the U.S. Department of Labor. So when you think of kind of a big bureaucracy, there's probably not one that's larger than one of those big government agencies. And yet she has really been a force for human-centered design and rolling that out across the agency. And she did that by doing two things that I think were very effective. The first was that she found a free online course that was run through Plus Acumen and IDEO.org, but that got everyone on board, speaking the same language, using the same tools, having the same methodology, and using that free resource as a way to get everyone comfortable with this kind of innovation approach. And then the second was she structured it as like a competition to get other people excited about human-centered solutions that culminated at the White House, where people got awards for their prototypes. So obviously that's like, if you're in a leadership position and kind of have the resources to roll that kind of initiative out, that's great. But if you're just at the smaller level, maybe just starting out and you want to introduce innovation, I think, finding one of those free courses or workshops that you can get everyone in your team to take together kind of becomes the Trojan horse for you to introduce this kind of new thinking in the context of a professional development kind of workshop or initiative. And then if you can collect kind of tangible stories or case studies of the changes that you made as a result, usually when you're using something like human-centered design or lean data, it's going to result in more customer satisfaction, more happy beneficiaries, whoever you're serving. You're usually going to end up with kind of case studies or anecdotes of improvements, and you can use those to kind of continue to build upon and capture that momentum within your organization.
Yeah, I think just to build on that, I think even sometimes if you feel like you don't have the control to actually kind of create a movement within your organization, then think about, like, what is it that is under your control, and how do you rally people around yourself so that you can kind of come up with one piece of, we don't need to call it evidence, but like one case of how using lean or human-centered design or whatever we want to call it, how that actually shifted the outcome of something. And it may have been like a mini step, but at least it gets attention and more eyeballs on it within your organization so that you can kind of take the next leap at the next opportunity.
This might be a good time to step back and just ask you guys if you could point people at some of the specific tools that both Acumen and IDEO.org have online that people can access. And I believe maybe Felicia can chime in here that we also have links to some of those tools on the YouTube site as well. But Amy and Shalu, could you talk about the tools that you have?
Sure. So I've referenced it several times, but at plusacumen.org, and that's spelled out PLUS, acumen.org, we offer over 30 free and low-cost courses for social change makers. So that includes a course on human-centered design and prototyping that just launched with IDEO.org last week, so you can still sign up for that. And then our course on lean data starts October 10th. That is also free. And then we'll have one on lean startup and lean startup principles for social impact starting in early 2018. So that includes several links to different offerings we have with IDEO.org on human-centered design, including the facilitator's guide if you're looking to kind of roll it out within an organization.
Excellent.
And then for, if you want to get a little bit more in depth with some of the resources that are available, designkit.org is a website that kind of has all of our methods and approaches in pretty accessible ways, lots of little video snippets and examples from our project work. And then I think you can even go to IDEO.org's website and see some of the stories of projects firsthand, and that might also give you a little bit of inspiration.
Thank you. So another question from the audience is, what are the key drivers for leaders within social enterprises to start with lean startup? I've certainly seen in the social sector, innovation has become a very popular buzzword. Everybody has innovation teams and innovation in their mission and innovation initiatives. But a lot of times these things don't add up too much. I used to be the chief innovation officer at an international NGO, and over time, I found that I started calling myself the chief impact officer, because what I believed is that the reason for innovation is not because innovation's a good thing to do innately, but really it's to drive greater impact. And so I'm curious what your experience is. What's been the motivation for people to start picking up some of these tools?
Every time we try to roll out a lean data approach within either one of our own companies or within another company, we always sit down with the entrepreneur first and really ask what their key business priorities are, right? Because that's what, as a company leader, you're kind of focused on your bottom line, your day-to-day priorities. And so we try to design a lean impact survey that will help to get at some of those business priorities. Because we really think that value proposition design, if you are serving your customers better and making more impact in their lives, usually that's also going to have a positive contribution to your bottom line and your business priorities too. So there's kind of a linkage between those two things. So to get concrete, one of the companies we sat down with was a solar home system company. And again, they thought they were kind of busy, like did they really have this time to roll out this impact survey and these new innovation tools? But when we surveyed, thousands of their customers, we realized that actually some of them were reporting back challenges with using these solar home systems, and there was installation problems. So it ended up uncovering some of these customer service problems that also would ultimately have social impact if people were able to deploy the solar home systems effectively. So I think it's starting to think about impact not as something external to your business, but as something that is very integrated. And so if you get better at measuring and delivering social impact, you'll also be serving your customers better.
Excellent. Any thoughts on that, Chalu?
Yeah, I think just kind of building on your comment that like innovation is the latest buzzword, I think it's actually, going to result in much better things that are going to go out the door, because now funders are asking folks to understand their end user, and it's starting to become more prevalent across all of the RFPs that are coming out. And to me, that's a great indication that everyone is seeing the value of talking to understanding who the end user is, and then kind of creating the right solutions based on that. So I think we're moving forward, which is great. It's kind of how do we just get everyone access to the right tools and approaches so that they gain confidence and capability around it.
Great. Another question from the audience is one that I've heard many times, and Shalu, it'd be great for you and I to discuss this, which is when to choose lean and when to choose design thinking. From my perspective, all of the things we're talking about here, whether lean data or design thinking or lean startup, are all 100% compatible. They're just slightly different terminologies and slightly different emphases. I'm curious what your experiences have been.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I think the concept of, you can start scrappy, you can learn about your end user, you can put solutions in front of them. All of those things are relevant from both methodologies. I think they live in concert with one another and are not kind of separate worlds. So find what you want that resonates and then just do it.
That's great. And what I would say is in the framework that I'm developing for the Lean Impact book, I talk about testing hypotheses in 3 dimensions. One is user value, customer demand, which is very much, I think, the core of what folks like IDEO and human-centered design focus on. Another set of hypotheses I talk about is around social impact, which is, I think, a lot of what Lean data focus on. What are the early indicators of social impact so you can optimize around that? And then the third is around growth, and what are the drivers for growth and scale? And that is another dimension that I think it's important to optimize around. So when it comes to trying to achieve Lean impact, the goal is to really test and optimize around all 3 of these dimensions of value, impact, and growth in order to have a solution that really can scale and reach maximal impact. Another question from the audience is, what are you seeing from funders? Are you seeing funders becoming more receptive to funding this kind of, more iterative risk-taking approach? I mean, traditionally funders have actually been more of a barrier to some of these approaches than supporter. Are you seeing that starting to change?
I think it depends on the sector. Because some sectors seem to be a lot more entrenched in like evidence bases before kind of taking any leaps. But I think broad strokes, I think, yes, funders are open to new ways of measuring success. But some of them definitely want to see the data. So like, for example, we're working on a large program funded by Gates and SIF on adolescence and reproductive health called A360, Adolescence 360. And in that project, the entire kind of basis of that program is around kind of participatory methods, bringing human-centered design as a key methodology. But there is an external evaluation that's going on the process to see whether there is impact from the numbers of girls that actually have access, impact from the design process as coming up with different solutions. So I think we're kind of at a moment of transition of like kind of funders being open to multiple methods and approaches, but then I think they're navigating their own kind of priorities on how and when to use different measurement tools. I don't know if you've seen.
Yeah, I think I would say similarly. I think there's probably a spectrum from funders that are still quite risk averse and maybe want more of an evidence base before they're willing to fund anything that's kind of without that kind of research and rigorous proof, to ones that are paying lip service to kind of this new talk and trends about innovation and human-centered design and things like that, but when like the rubber hits the road, maybe are still expecting kind of more cumbersome monitoring and evaluation processes. And then there's ones that really have kind of dug in head first and I think are willing to kind of think of investing in impact or funding these initiatives as kind of a journey that the implementing organization and the funder are taking together and using customer voices and beneficiary insights to guide that approach as they go. So I think kind of engaging with the people who are funding you and helping them to kind of get up to speed with why some of you should use some of these methodologies are important conversations for any organization to be having with the people who are funding them.
Excellent. And I have a specific question from the audience about a particular context of whether either of you have examples of how you've used some of these techniques to improve agency and choice in environments where there's a lot of violence and intimidation. More and more of the challenges in global poverty are in fragile states, and you're often working with very challenging environments. Do you have any examples that you might be able to share from those types of contexts?
Yeah, I think one that's coming to mind is a project that we're working on right now in collaboration with American Refugee Committee. They have a refugee camp in Western Uganda called Nakivale, which has about 100,000 refugees. So they run programs around clean water, shelter, as well as gender-based violence. And they have teams that are kind of accountable to go and respond to those crises as they take place. And the question that kind of we're helping them with is how does ARC shift from provision of basic services to becoming best-in-class customer service? And so to that end, we've spent a lot of time understanding the displaced populations there, understanding their needs, what has their experience been, understanding ARC's team on the ground, and really building their ownership and accountability around being excited to be customer service representatives. And then now we're kind of building a system in collaboration with them that helps surface when people are experiencing issues and then holding teams accountable to respond. And so this may not be an exact answer around violence, but I think it's like a question around like very vulnerable populations and being able to elevate their voice and hold people accountable. And so it's a really exciting and challenging process, but what we're trying to do is create opportunities for people to raise their hand regardless of where they are. So that means using technology like tablet applications where there's no Wi-Fi coverage. We're creating kind of offline methods to be able to collect feedback from people, and then kind of holding teams accountable to respond. So sorry, a little bit vague, but yeah.
And I would kind of similarly say Acumen has done a lot of investing work in Pakistan, and we have an office there. And again, that's a place where, you know, there's just vast inequities between different parts of the population. But we've been working with a water company there called Pharmagen. And so doing a lean data sprint there to really reach out to the end users of this water service and get their insights. And we found in many cases that, you know, these are the first time that some of these customers have been asked directly for feedback on the products and services that they use. And so even if it's via a mobile phone or an interactive voice response survey, the survey response rates are, you know, way higher than you might see in the US, just because being given the dignity of being asked for their perspectives on a consumer good is such a novel thing that we've really been able to use those insights to actually help this company rebrand their water initiative and, you know, come out with a whole different marketing campaign based on the insights of those customers. So I think anytime you're asking kind of these marginalized or groups that just haven't had their voices elevated to the same degree, you get a lot of rich insights back.
Mm-hmm. And this might be more of a question for Shalu. Someone has a question about designing an MVP in the social sector, like, you know, in the minimum viable product for people who aren't familiar with that terminology. Oh, I think we might have just lost Shalu and Amy. Felicia, are you on the line?
Looks like they're joining us back again, and it might take a little bit of video to come back, but yeah. In the meantime, we just want to say thank you, everyone, for the questions that's been coming in. I think this is the most engaged we've got with our audiences. And it looks like they're just coming back. How are you doing, everyone?
Welcome back, Shalu and Amy. So I was just going to ask Shalu about designing an MVP or minimum viable product in the social sector context. Like, you know, how can you give an example? Is that a bit hard or easier than maybe, you know, the work that IDEO does in the private sector? And can you give an example of what that might look like to, you know, roll out an MVP, you know, that's like a very kind of cheap, quick prototype?
Sure. So I'll use an example called Asili, which was a social enterprise that we designed in the Congo in collaboration with the American Refugee Committee. And they basically, you know, they came to us saying, like, we want to really combat under 5 mortality. We know it's a problem here. You know, 1 in 5 children dies before their 5th birthday. We know that if we want to tackle it, there has to be clean water, nutritious food, access to health services, and we want it to be a sustainable business. But we don't know exactly how those pieces are going to fit together. And so we said, okay, we got to figure out if this is going to be community owned, what does that actually mean in these contexts? And so we, our primary kind of method that we used was co-design. And so we brought in, like, we did a bunch of research in a bunch of villages, and then we chose like 2 of these mamas from different villages and then brought them into town for 2 days of workshops, and basically asked them to tell us where should this physically be located in your community? Who should be running it? How should it function? What should the brand stand for? What is the customer experience? What can people afford to pay? And so they basically helped us figure out what should the system look like. And then we were able to then take it into a community and try it out and have people act out the different roles. And we just kind of ran it for a few days to see what did we learn. And then that enabled us to take a step back, synthesize what we learned, and then give them a handbook that enabled them to launch the business 6 months later. So I think it's how do you learn the things that you don't know? In this case, we really did not know a lot, so we had to gather a lot of information. But then how do you just put it back in front of people and see how well it's accepted, and then refine and just put something out there? So yeah.
That's great. And a question for Amy, if you've heard of the term innovation accounting in the lean startup context, the question is, what are the specific metrics that, in the for-profit context, innovation accounting often means, looking at actual conversion rates of, people who are purchasing on an e-commerce site. What are the kinds of metrics for innovation accounting that you see make sense in the social sector context?
One specific metric that our impact team has recently been trying out is called the customer effort score. And it's also used in kind of more traditional contexts that are not social sector related. But basically it asks, like, did you encounter any challenges or issues while trying to use this product or service? Were they resolved? And how easy did the company make it to resolve this issue? And they've actually found that it's 7 times more predictive of customer loyalty than the net promoter score. So that is just one new metric that I think we're still in the early days of trying it out. But because, some of these innovations that are being rolled out, whether it's, a toilet or some kind of new technology, might just be so novel in the context of these customers' lives. They may just not have accessed these kind of consumer goods before. Asking about the level of effort that it required to actually use them is one way that it's kind of a clear indicator of whether or not there's still issues that need to be addressed within that business.
Mm-hmm. Feels like it's a metric they should use across the board for anything new.
Yeah, probably true. Yeah.
Oh,
So I have another question from the audience. What are some of the limitations that you guys have come across in using lean and design thinking approaches? Are there drawbacks or pitfalls that you've come across, and how have you handled those?
I think one thing we are really mindful of when trying to roll out these approaches is just the ethical implications, right? Whenever you're rolling out terms like experimentation in the context of these interventions that are really determining people's quality of life, I think you really just want to be mindful of, like, this is not just like A/B testing a homepage for some kind of novel product that comes out of Silicon Valley. Like, if it's the difference between whether or not a kid gets a high quality education or not, you need to be a little bit more careful about the ethics of an experiment and what you're designing for. And so I think one way to do that is, like Shalu mentioned, like co-design is really involving local people in whatever kind of intervention you're rolling out, whether they're the ones asking the questions to elicit the customer feedback, so you're really getting honest opinions, you're getting input directly from them on the kind of prototypes or experiments you're designing, so that they can raise any kind of issues they might see with how this might be deployed in kind of local communities. But just being kind of mindful and conscientious of the ethics, I think, of rolling out lean experiments in these contexts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a little bit on a different line of thinking, but I think sometimes the challenge can be continuing to just like keep an open mind about about staying inspired. And a lot of times folks who are kind of leading innovation, they might be in a sector that hasn't changed in many years. And so you're kind of the sole champion of innovation, but then you need to stay inspired too. So kind of making the space to keep looking outside at analogous sectors, reading stuff that keeps you inspired so that you can keep channeling that. I think that's something that can really be challenging. And I think there are a lot of digital and online networks that kind of can help feed you ideas and inspiration, but it's important to plug into it.
Great. Another question from the audience is about the innovation process. I think there's a perception, I've heard this certainly before, that people think that innovation means everyone can just do whatever they feel like. It's kind of a free-for-all, whether you're management and you feel like that now I have no control over my people, or you're somebody who's in an organization. So what does the process of innovation look like in terms of what people do and what they're held accountable to?
A big question.
I mean, this is where I think having kind of a variety of methods or toolkits can be really useful, whether that's something like the human-centered design process that's going to step you through all the way from inspiration to ideation to prototyping, but you kind of have a roadmap to follow to structure different parts of that process. Or you're using something like systems thinking to first kind of map out the area in which you want to innovate and the system where you want to change something, and then identifying leverage points. So there's a variety of these different kinds of innovation mindsets or innovation toolkits that you can use. But I think what they all usefully do is lend some kind of overarching framework so that you don't feel like you're kind of just spinning off out of nowhere. There are, experts in the field like IDEO.org that have tried these processes again and again. And so if you can take their lead on some of the kind of common road posts that you're going to want to hit and the kind of questions that come up, that can be really useful.
I think as you go about that process, also kind of like looking inward and being like, what does innovation mean to me and my organization? And if you truly believe that things need to change to get to better solutions for the people we're trying to serve, then something has to give. And you have to be flexible and nimble. And what is the extent to which you are comfortable with that shift? And so that you don't feel like your employees are running all over the place, but maybe if your employees are running all over the place, they might actually come up with something better. So kind of having that internal dialogue of like, what does innovation mean to me and to my organization, and how important is it to get to impact and creating that freedom for the people around. So.
Yeah, and if I can add sort of one other element to this, I often think of, the innovation process as not like, delivering goods and services. That's not how you're measured, which is typically how a lot of social sector organizations are measured, but rather your pace of learning. And so I find it very useful to set very clear goals and targets that are ambitious of what you're trying to achieve in terms of impact or, price point or any of the things that you're trying to optimize around, and then have a clear learning agenda around that topic so that you have questions that you're trying to answer and assumptions you're trying to either confirm or refute. And there's a real sense of progress of validating those questions and making progress towards whatever the goal is. But at the unit level, you're not necessarily scaling to large numbers of people, but you're improving each unit of what you're delivering to be either more cost effective or more impactful or more valued or otherwise. So I think we have time for just one last question before our 45 minutes are up. And one I see here is, have you had any experience empowering end users using Lean Startup to change attitudes towards sustainability? And if you haven't, maybe you could talk a little bit about how might you use some of these approaches if what you wanted to do is change people's attitudes around, I'm assuming this is environmental sustainability.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think the closest thing that we probably have is we've invested in a lot of clean cook stove companies. And so on a kind of individual level, you're trying to switch households from using kerosene or things that are consuming fossil fuels to cleaner fuel alternatives. So whether that's a clean cook stove or a solar home system. So that's really kind of individual behavior change. And I think sometimes you're wanting to link it up to like these larger sustainability goals. But sometimes it's really focusing on what matters to that end user to help them make that switch within their household. So maybe that's, they want a solar home system because then their kids can study longer at night, or they can cook food like all of their neighbors are. So really tapping into the kind of the individual drivers, the individual attitudes, getting to that human level, not always thinking of it. Of course, if you can aggregate to the bigger impact goal of like sustainability, that's great. But you really have to start with kind of the customer-driven insights and why they might be motivated to make those switch to cleaner alternatives.
And I think I heard the question a little bit differently, but like if it is around convincing someone to adopt Lean within their organization, like I'll just take that lens on it. But I almost use a lot of like these partner mindset shift opportunities as like a little design project. So like, how do I understand, like, if you are skeptical about human-centered design or Lean, like, how do I use you as my research subject and surface insights about what is important to you and what matters to your organization and how this approach might fit into what you're trying to accomplish, and like really kind of put things in front of them as almost sacrificial concepts or prototypes to see what sticks, that then enables us to kind of make a small experiment together. To demonstrate what the value of the approach can bring to their organization. So anyway.
Thank you. Well, we're coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to see if each of you might want to just give me 30 seconds of any last messages you want to leave the audience with.
I think I would just say, like, go out and talk to your customers, talk to your end users, try to surface their insights, their perspectives, especially if you're working in the social sector. Talk to people that haven't been interviewed or haven't been asked for their voice before, and really focus on that as your starting point. And check out any of the free Plus Acumen courses if you're looking for more guidance on how to do so.
Yeah, and I think don't be scared. Just go out and try it. And there's lots of resources around, and there's lots of people who are there to support you in your journey. And yeah, good luck.
Well, thank you so much for your insights today. And thank you so much for the audience for such great questions. I hope that our webcast has given you just a little taste of the importance, potential, and challenges of achieving lean impact. We have a lot more in store for you at the Lean Startup Conference, where I'll be giving a keynote, and all three of us are running workshops as part of a lean impact track. I hope you'll join us there. And to close, I'm just going to hand back over to Felicia.
All right, thanks to everyone for joining us today. This wraps up our show. Again, Lean Startup Week 2017 is 1.5 months away. If you're planning on joining us in San Francisco, grab your pass before October 15th to save on our fall sale. Visit leanstartup.co for more information.